He ate takeout constantly and spent nights watching TV in silence. But the hardest part was calling home. Jake would tell me about his new teacher, and every week he sounded quieter. Mom tried to sound upbeat when she took the phone, but I knew she was barely holding things together. 6 months later, Dad sat me down and said something I'll never forget. "You know this doesn't have to be permanent, right? If you want to go back, we can make it work." I told him I was okay, that I liked it there. He chuckled, not meanly but knowingly. "Kid, you've been miserable since the day you got here. You think I can't tell?" That's when I broke down, really cried. Harder than I had since the divorce started. I told him everything, that I picked him so Jake wouldn't be alone, that I felt like I abandoned my little brother, that I was terrified he'd forget me. Dad hugged me while I sobbed and said, "You didn't choose between two lives, sweetheart. You chose to give up yours so everyone else could keep theirs." We ended up finding a different arrangement. I moved back with Mom and Jake, but spent summers and holidays with Dad. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Jake got his sister back. Mom had support again, and Dad got visits filled with love instead of a lonely teenager drowning in guilt. After moving back, life felt like a fragile balance. Every day was a reminder of the choice I'd made. I watched Mom slowly rebuild her life while juggling work and Jake. She still had moments of weakness, nights when the house was quiet, and I could hear her crying softly in her bedroom. I wanted to hug her, tell her it would all be okay, but she never asked for help. She tried so hard to appear strong for Jake and me. Jake, too, carried a heavy burden. He was 8, but he understood more than I ever gave him credit for. He'd walk softly through the house, careful not to wake anyone, and sometimes I'd catch him staring at the empty side of his room where Dad's presence used to be. On weekends, when we called Dad, he would smile and laugh for us, but I could see it in his eyes. The quiet. School became a battlefield of its own. I had to adjust back to my old school, where people didn't understand what I had been through. Some classmates whispered, some stared, and some didn't know what to say. Teachers didn't know either. They treated me as if I'd done something wrong. As if choosing which parent to live with was some kind of crime. I carried the weight of everyone's assumptions, on top of my own guilt. Friends helped when they could. Ashley, my best friend, became my anchor. She would sit with me during lunch, asking nothing about the divorce, just letting me be. Some days that was all I needed, someone to sit with me, to make me laugh, to remind me that the world hadn't ended. But laughter often felt hollow. Every joke reminded me of what I had lost. Every smile carried a shadow of guilt. Time passed slowly, but moments of relief came in small doses. Dad would call late at night and we'd talk about movies, music, or school, pretending nothing had changed. Those calls were lifelines, brief moments where I felt like I hadn't chosen it all, that the world was still whole. Jake would sneak into my room during these calls, whispering questions about Dad, and I would answer as honestly as I could. Those whispered conversations became a secret world where guilt, love, and hope coexisted. High school brought new challenges. Social life became complicated. People couldn't understand why I had moved back, why I spent summers with Dad, or why I seemed so quiet. I withdrew, spending hours writing in my journal, letting my thoughts spill out. Guilt, anger, sadness, and sometimes even relief. Writing became a way to breathe, to organize the chaos that the divorce had left behind. Mom worked hard to keep the family afloat. I watched her struggle, knowing I had played a part in the family's imbalance. She'd come home exhausted, but she still managed to make dinner, check homework, and ask about my day. One evening, I found her asleep at the kitchen table with papers scattered around her, bills, legal documents, and letters from school. I realized then that she had carried so much. Alone, and my choice, while meant to protect Jake, had only added to her burden. I hugged her tightly that night, and she whispered, "You did the right thing. We're okay because of you." I wanted to believe her, but the guilt lingered. Summer visits to Dad's house were bittersweet. We would spend the days laughing, playing video games, and cooking meals together. At night, though, the silence would creep in. Dad would sit in his chair, staring at the living room wall, and I knew he was thinking about the life he had lost with us. I would sit beside him, pretending everything was fine, even as my chest ached with the weight of my choice. By the time I reached my senior year, I started to understand something fundamental. The choice I made wasn't about who I loved more. It was about understanding the needs of everyone I loved, and making the impossible decision to prioritize their happiness over my own. That realization didn't make it easier, but it gave my guilt purpose. The years that followed taught me resilience. College brought independence and distance from the family dynamics that had consumed my teenage years. I chose a university close enough to see Mom and Jake often, but far enough to build my own life. Dad would come visit, bringing with him the smell of his old apartment, the same fishing stories, and that quiet understanding that no words could match. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Through therapy, journaling, and countless conversations with both parents, I began to forgive myself. I realized that being forced to choose between two lives didn't mean I had failed. It meant I had been trusted with the impossible. I learned to see the beauty in sacrifice, in love, and in the quiet ways families heal. Jake grew up into a resilient young man, carrying the lessons of that time with him. He never forgot, and he never blamed me. We became closer than ever, bound not just by blood, but by the understanding that sometimes love is about making hard choices, even when the heart is breaking. Mom found love again, slowly, carefully, but never in a way that replaced her devotion to us. Dad stayed single for a long time, finding companionship in hobbies, work, and later in his grandkids when they arrived. And me? I learned that life doesn't give easy answers, and sometimes the hardest choices shape us in ways nothing else can. Now, when I look back, I understand. I wasn't choosing between two lives. I was choosing the life that allowed everyone I loved to survive, to thrive, to keep moving forward. And that is a choice worth everything.